Good morning, everyone. My name is Sean Goldsmith. I'm a marketing manager here at BonitaSoft. Thanks for joining us here today. I'm here with my colleague Antoine Motier. He's based in our Grenoble office in France, and he's very excited to be here with us to discuss a really good topic. But before getting into the technicals, I just wanted to give you a little bit of a background on Antoine. Antoine's been a software engineer and a developer for a very long time. He worked at Bull originally, and he's been with BonitaSoft for over 5 years. He's worked on hundreds of BPM implementations. As a developer, he worked with Java a lot, but once he came to BonitaSoft, the difficult part is already taking the BPM and integrating it with other information systems, and that's really where he became an expert at BonitaSoft, and now he's really a BPM evangelist, going throughout, different countries and explaining, how BonitaSoft works, building custom applications and with different workflows. But he's really an integration specialist. So without any further ado, I'm going to hand it off to Antoine.
Thank you, Sean, and welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on this presentation about user authentication in Bonita BPM. So I'll go through a quick overview of the agenda for today's presentation. I will start with an important part about understanding how Bonita BPM store the organization, how it stores all user groups, role information, how this organization is kept into Bonita. And related to that, I will speak about how tasks are assigned to users, how Bonita decide which user can do a task, how a user take a task, because those two chapters are really key to understand the next part about how you integrate Bonita with an LDAP server to manage synchronization of users, but also delegate the authentication, the user authentication to the LDAP server. And finally, I will speak a little bit about how Bonita can be integrated with some single sign-on system. During this whole presentation, feel free to ask your question in GoToWebinar. You have this tool to send your question, and I will try to take a few breaks to answer the question that you can post there. So we'll start with the Bonita BPM organization. So as you may know, Bonita engine, the workflow engine, is also in charge of storing the organization, and so we store that in a database. So database in Bonita can be, for example, Postgres or Oracle, can be configured for your production system. And the Bonita engine will store 4 different kind of elements, let's say, related to organization. First of all, the most important one is a user. We'll see on the next slide more detail about that. And also it will store groups to organize the user. You have a hierarchy of groups, so you have a parent-child relationship between groups. You have also roles, like it can be used for a position of users within a group, for example. And finally, we have this element of membership that group together a group and a role. So actually, a user is not in a group or have a role, but he have a membership. So this couple of group and role. I will get into more detail about that right away. So first, let's start with the user. Here you can see a screenshot. It's an extract of a database, Bonita database. It's a table that stores user information. As you can see, it will store classic user informations, such as the first name, the last name of the user, and it will also store some information that are required for authentication. That would be the username and the password. These two are mandatory for the default authentication system that is configured when you get a Bonita bundle. it will require the user to input this username in the login page, and the password will be checked. Again, what is stored here in the database. Actually, you can see it's encrypted. But one thing that is really key here in this table, that this is this ID column that you can see. It's actually the unique ID of the user that will be used by Bonita engine internally. It will use it, for example, when you want to assign tasks to a set of users. It might be use this ID, and it will produce a list of such ID and associate this list with a task. So it's not actually the username that is the key in this table. It's the ID, this numeric ID. For example, here we have the value 1 for the ID. It's also used in Bonita BPM portal when you configure user profiles, the privileges. Bonita rely on such ID. So we'll see that when we configure LDAP synchronizer, actually it's mandatory to have all users in Bonita database, because it's Bonita engine who create such ID. I'll move on with how Bonita engine define who can perform a task. So we have two different notions here. Let's say we have the candidates for a task. So when you have your task list, you might not be the only one to see a task. A task might possibly be performed by a set of users, and only one will take or claim the task and actually perform it. So to define who can possibly do a task, we have two options in Bonita. On one side we have the actor, and the other one will be the filters. And I will compare both and see advantage and limitation that both options might have. First, how actor work actually. Basically, when you create your process, so you have this set of tasks that can be performed by different users, you will just declare as a key just an ID. Like here you can see the example. We have this column name where we have employee, HR manager. It's just an ID. It's just a name. You don't yet define who can actually do this task, and you will define that only in the configuration. So you will map this actor ID to the actual Bonita organization. So in this example here, you can see that our HR manager actor is mapped in the configuration with the HR, with the membership. So it's all people in HR group who have the role manager, and in the same way the HR employee actor is mapped to the HR group, to all users that have the member role. And the big advantage of such solution is, first, you will be able to change this configuration live after process deployment. So if your organization evolved, like a new person joined the HR group, or someone left the group, moved to another position, immediately people will be able to perform new tasks, or will no longer be able to perform that task that doesn't belong to them anymore. So that's really the big advantage of this actor mapping solution, is that when you run the process, when the organization changed, it's immediately updated without any action except updating the organization. What actually happened at runtime when you use actor is that when you logged in, the engine will find out what are the actors declared in all the process deploy on Bonita engine, and it will be able, it will look at this actor configuration. So like the HR employee, you will see that HR employee is configured to take all user in the group HR with employee role. And when you logged in, it will check if you belong to this group, if the user that currently logged in is in the HR group with the proper role, it will flag this user with the actor name. And then it will matching between all the actor names associated with currently logged in user and the pending task actor name, and present a task based on that. So as soon as you logged in, you see all the tasks you can do. New tasks can come. You will see them right away when you logged in. The limitation of the actor system is that it relies only on the organization, like group roles, membership, a list of users. It cannot use an external system. Even if the organization can be extended, you can add some metadata. Sometimes you want to rely on an existing system, for example, that manage the skills of your employee or something like that. So in such situation, you will go for the filter option. And difference between actor and filter is that a filter will be actually be executed when process reach a task. So when you reach a task, the filter is a piece of code that will run and produce a list of user ID. So it's this ID that I can get back on previous slide here. It will produce a list of ID, as you can see in this table. So it will have a list of users that can possibly do the task. Sorry. And this list defines who can perform the task. So when you logged in into the portal, you can see the task because your position in the organization match actor definition, and also the task where your user ID match the one produced by the filter. The really nice thing about this filter, as I said, is like you can use external system. If you have an existing system that defines skills or any specific algorithm for dispatching tasks among all users, you can use them with filter. The drawback of such solution is that it runs once when the task become available. When the process reaches a task, the filter will run. Actually, you have a nice solution to change its behavior. You can call an API and ask for the filter to run again. So if you want, you can refresh the list of user ID produced by a filter using the API. And so to sum up, there is this logic to define who can perform a task. So how Bonita defines the candidate of a task. So if you have a filter on the task, it's the output of the filter that will define the candidate of the task. It's this list of ID. If you don't have any filter configured on task, in such situation, Bonita will use the actor. And there is two extra specific situations. There is the process owner profile that can perform a task on behalf of someone else. So there is this do for option, and you have the same as administration level. For administrator profile, you can also perform tasks like someone is in sick leave, for example, you need in a rush to make the process progress. Some administration then can take over and perform the task. So I'll just take a quick look at the question here. We have a question about the support of OAuth in Bonita or 2.0. Right now, honestly, I'm not aware of any specific development around that. I think technically, from my understanding, there is no limitation that can prevent us to integrate OAuth into Bonita, but I don't have feedback honestly about such running configuration. I can try to have a look and get back to you later maybe. But right now, sorry, I don't have the answer about such support. But my feeling is like technically I don't see any limitation on that. If you don't have more question on the user management and how Bonita define who can perform a task, I'll move on to the integration with LDAP. And on this topic, it's important to understand that there is two different actions you need to do to have this full integration of Bonita with an LDAP server. The first part would be to synchronize user stored in the LDAP with Bonita engine database. As we've seen, Bonita engine uses user ID internally for task assignation, and so having user in Bonita is mandatory, also because they are used for profiles, so to define privileges about like which kind of user have administrator privileges. It requires to have Bonita users in Bonita database. So the first part is this synchronization. Second part would be to delegate authentication to the LDAP server. You don't want to store password in two different databases, both in Bonita and into the LDAP server. So we want to synchronize them. As I said, I see the question in the chat that can we simply integrate LDAP without using synchronization? Again, this is not actually possible because Bonita work with this user ID to define who can perform a task. Even if you don't use filter, Bonita will use the organization, so groups, role, etc., to define privileges into Bonita. So synchronization is actually mandatory. You cannot just store your user into the LDAP and push all the information there. Authentication is the second part of this integration, as I said. So here you benefit from a single central point for authentication. If multiple applications are integrating with your LDAP, obviously your user will have to remember only one password, and that can be a great help from them. So let's see how we synchronize user. So as I said, this is a mandatory operation. We want to reuse the existing user database. So we have all this user already stored in some LDAP. Just a quick note, yeah, it's in the second line, but LDAP solution, Bonita solution, the LDAP synchronizer is also compatible with Active Directory because Active Directory just is just compatible with the LDAP protocol. So it's perfectly work with OpenLDAP, Active Directory, and many more. In case you use something else that is not compatible with LDAP, like another third-party solution, still it's possible to build some synchronization tool. We already, as part of the service offer of Bonitasoft, we already did such kind of custom development for specific requirement of our clients. when they have their very specific in-house user database, we are able to build something equivalent to our standard offer here, the LDAP synchronizer. So how it works actually, basically it will read user and group information from the LDAP server and push them toward Bonita engine using the engine API. When I say that it reads some information, it will not read all of them. It will not read password because passwords are encrypted in the LDAP server, and it cannot push them as is in Bonita database because it will not be it will not get the key to decrypt them and to validate them, so it cannot be synchronized. But that's not an issue because you will delegate the authentication, the verification of passwords to the LDAP server. So the password will probably remain empty in Bonita user database. We'll see that you can configure which users will be synchronized, which part of your LDAP will be synchronized, and you can limit the scope of this synchronization, especially if you have a very large organization. LDAP synchronizer have no trouble with that. We synchronize thousands of users, but and a lot more actually. But if you want, you can, like, if there is only a small set of your employee that actually work with Bonita, you can limit the scope of the synchronization. This LDAP synchronizer is built on top of the Bonita BPM Java client library. So it will use this library to connect to Bonita over HTTP or AGB to call the API and perform all the update operation, and it's packaged as a Java standalone application. So it's required as Bonita actually Java 7 or higher to run. It doesn't include a scheduler, so you'll need to rely on something like cron to decide at which frequency you want to run it. Usually clients set up it to run at night when there is less activity, but it doesn't do a very intense activity on the engine, so there is no risk to run it during the day. During working hours, performance will remain totally correct. So I'll go a little bit deeper in the configuration to give you an idea about what we can do with this LDAP synchronizer. So we have 4 different kind of configuration file. Each of them has is a very specific responsibility. So the first one will just basically told the LDAP synchronizer how to connect to Bonita. So the LDAP synchronizer will have this Bonita home configuration file, and it will read from there how to connect. So we'll get from there also in the configuration. Sorry, I'll start over. It will read in Bonita home configuration file how to connect to the engine, and it will get directly into Bonita properties the credential to create users, and also it needs some extra credential because, as you know, in subscription edition you can have multiple tenants, so we'll need here to do a conversion between the tenant name and tenant ID, so we need to have the technical platform admin credential. I see the question in the chat about the LDAP synchronizer in Community Edition. Actually, this is a subscription edition feature only. It's provided, if I'm correct, it's provided in, actually I don't want to say something wrong. So it's in our subscription edition. So I don't remember exactly which of them, but yeah, it's subscription only. So this is the first part here of the configuration, is how the synchronizer will connect to Bonita. And then you have the second part of this list, how the synchronizer will connect to the LDAP. So you have classic parameter like the server address, the credential to connect, and this is important because the user you use to connect need to have the proper privileges, proper rights to search for user and group information and read them. There is one extra setting, I will not spend too much on that, about which kind of LDAP object class is used to store user. And we have some pagination settings there to make sure that it's performant and efficient in terms of memory usage. So that's something very important in this LDAP is like we test it on very large organization because it's really key to keep all the information and to be reliable when you sync a lot of users. You will not be able to compare the sync when well, by checking the organization content. So this is the two first file, how to connect to Bonita, how to connect to the LDAP. And the next configuration file is how you map your user information with Bonita user attributes. As I showed in the first slide, the Bonita database, you have username, first name, last name, email address also. So you will, on the left in the configuration file, you will have the name of the attribute in Bonita. On the right, you will define the name of the attribute in the LDAP, and so we can adapt to any different kind of LDAP structure and class of object to synchronize the information properly. And finally, the last file is how you search for users, how you search for groups to synchronize in the LDAP. So you can search for groups and choose to synchronize all users within this group, or you can define the location of the group and choose to include user in the group or not. You can search for users in multiple different locations, recursively or not. You have all the flexibility of the LDAP search because on each company the structure of LDAP can really vary a lot, and here we give the flexibility to match almost any kind of scenario for the LDAP structure. And something that is quite important here is the LDAP, when it will perform this synchronization, it will never do any modification on the LDAP server. It's really one-way synchronization. It's go from the LDAP. This is a reference toward Bonita. And in Bonita, it will never delete a user. It will actually disable them. That's because Bonita keep history about user operation, like which user instantiate a process, for example. And if this user has left the company, it might be deleted from the LDAP. But in Bonita, you want to keep him. That's because he's no longer is still associated as the initiator of one process. So when you check the history of execution of one process, you still want to have information about the user, first name, last name, when you check history of your process. So you only disable user in Bonita, you don't delete them. And now we'll move on the just a quick slide on LDAP authentication concept, and then I will have a short demo about the setup of Bonita that authenticate on an LDAP. So LDAP authentication actually is a specific service implementation in Bonita, and it doesn't provide directly the integration with the LDAP. We rather rely on a standard Java service, it's called Jazz, and it provides a specific login module for LDAP integration. That helps us to guarantee that we are able to integrate with almost any kind of LDAP server. I was never aware of any customer that was not able to integrate Bonita with his own LDAP. I never see any limitation. The challenge when doing so is to make sure you get all the information about your LDAP, like of course the proper user name, credential, make sure your user have proper privilege to search, but technically, yeah, it's really easy to integrate with any kind of LDAP. I will show you here this quick demonstration about integration of Bonita with an LDAP server. So here I have this my LDAP view here with some user, and here I have two groups. I have in my super manager group, I have my user Walter Bates, standard user in Bonita, but here it will really be created from this LDAP. And in the travel department here I have two members. I have Jack. Jack was our old Bonita 5 user, default user, and we have Walter Bates, our Bonita 6 default user. And so what I actually do is I'll open, sorry, I will switch here to my Bonita server. I'll just need to start it up, and I will demonstrate how you can synchronize users from this LDAP to Bonita. We're starting up. So LDAP server, LDAP synchronizer is just basically a command line tool. I already configured the various files I show you. We can have a quick look here, but quite simple. I have the location of the configuration file Bonita home to connect to Bonita. I have my connection to my LDAP running locally. I have this mapping between Bonita user information and LDAP attribute, user attribute, and I have the synchronization configuration file here. And you can see, for example, here I say that my synchronizers should watch one directory in my LDAP, and I give the distinguished name of this directory. So I'll go to people to find user to synchronize, and also I configure two groups to watch. Here I put the DN of my super manager group and my travel department group. Also, you can see below we have example where we actually search for a group rather than giving right away the distinguished name of the groups. So here I'll log into Bonita just to show you, like, I will actually create a new account for myself. So right now I will just log in with a technical user install default username and password, and if I check here I can see it's already synchronized with my user, LDAP user, but if I search for myself, for example, I kind of find this user, and I will go back to my LDAP browser. So here I'm using Apache Directory Studio, and I will create a new user in my LDAP. And so yeah, I figure out that the Apache Directory Studio is right now in French, but basically what I'm doing right now is I just create a new entry in my LDAP. It will be an INET.org person, and here I will set the UID to be my username. Okay, I'll put my name here, just type the information. Okay, I'll need just to add a few extra one. Here I'll put the given name, and just last one is I will add the user password. And I'll set a very secure password of 3 characters. Okay, so now I have a new user in my LDAP, and I will just run the LDAP synchronizer to create all this new user in Bonita. So basically, it will go through the LDAP, searching for difference between the data that I have right now in my LDAP server and Bonita database. And now if I get back to Bonita here, and if I run my search again, you can see I have this new user here, and with my username. And so if I log out from this, I will be able to see if the authentication running against the LDAP actually work. And yeah, it seems to work as expected. So here I've just synchronized my user, and I'm able to authenticate against my LDAP server. If I just update my password in the LDAP, so that can actually happen to a user like on Windows Active Directory. If this is the same password as the one to connect to his Windows domain, this password can be updated. I will define a new one here, 4 letters this time, and if I switch back to the login screen here, if I try to log in again with the old password, it no longer works. So you see that I actually use LDAP information, not the one synchronized into Bonita to check the user credential. If I put the new one, I can successfully log in. So that's really helpful to keep the access to Bonita secured, because you have this central location to check user credential, and also if multiple applications use that, user only need to remember one password. So that's really great. But next step is the single sign-on. This is like the very ultimate configuration for the user, is that it will only have to log in once and access to multiple applications. All those applications will delegate the authentication to the single sign-on server. Basically what happened is, for example, you logged into your computer, and the single sign-on server will provide you a token that you can send with your request to any application, so such as Bonita. And when Bonita is configured for single sign-on, it will take this token from the request and ask validation to the single sign-on server. If the token is not valid, Bonita will require the user to go to the login page. It will to the login page of the single sign-on system. If the token is valid, the user will directly access Bonita portal task list without any user input. I don't have such setup right now on my computer, but Bonita provide integration, official integration of CAS, and you can check out the documentation online. There is all detail about such setup. Again, this is a subscription edition feature, and we also did for various clients some Active Directory Kerberos integration. This one can be a little bit challenging because the security configuration of Kerberos really vary a lot from one setup to another, but it's actually worked great, and people basically just logged in into their Windows session and have access to Bonita without any password request. And yeah, I think that's it for this presentation about authentication and user management in Bonita. If you have any question, I'm available for a few more minutes. And yeah, don't hesitate to send any question or come up on our community forum if you want to ask even about those kind of feature. I spend quite a time in there to answer and guide users on such feature. About the link of the recording of this presentation, I think it will be shared soon on our website. The video should be available soon. I think we'll end up this presentation. Thank you very much to everyone for joining us today, and hope you all have a successful BPM implementation with Bonita. Thanks you all. Bye.